Welcome to Pushing Forward with Alycia, a podcast that gives disability a voice. Each week, we will explore topics like confidence, ambition, resilience, and finding success against all odds. We are creating a collective community that believes that all things are possible for all people. Open hearts, clear paths, let's go. Welcome back to Pushing Forward with Alycia. I'm Alycia. We have an incredible guest today. Yan Vishnepolsky is an entrepreneur, leader in user experience. His passion lies in artificial intelligence. He's got a podcast called Human-Centered AI, and he was also diagnosed as neurodiverse at an early age. Yan, welcome to Pushing Forward with Alycia.
Thank you so much. It's just so much a pleasure to be here, to be able to talk to your audience about neurodiversity in my career, and I'm very excited about this episode. I'm
so excited. You are one of the most timely episodes and conversations we're having. I mean, in the workplace specifically, all we're hearing about is AI. There's a ton of advocacy going on in education around neurodiversity. So I'm beyond thrilled to have you and your brilliant mind on this podcast. What is neurodiversity to you?
So in my case, and neurodiversity comes in many forms. That's why they call it neurodiversity. But in my case, I was diagnosed with ADHD and autism. And they call it a spectrum because depending on where you fall on the spectrum, you can have it more expressive or less expressive. There's also these terms like high functioning, which means like you basically have more masking, what we call masking. Other communities call it code switching, but it kind of gives you an idea of what it requires to be neurodiverse to function in society and do things like have a job.
I've been listening to a ton of your interviews, and there was one interview specifically where you're talking about how an 8-hour day feels like this exhausting thing when you're done with it because of trying to keep up with this like typical world. Everybody needs to fit in this box. And it takes a lot of work to adapt to that.
Yes. So basically what happens, at least to people who are ADHD and on the spectrum, this seems to be like an area of intersection between us, is that we have like these periods of hyperfocus. And what that means is that we not only focus like people who are not neurodiverse, neurotypical people do, but we take it to the next level, basically, to the point where like we really throw ourselves into a topic. And to some people, it might come off as almost obsessive, but that also is like what gives it our superpower, so to speak, because we get really into a topic. That's how I became an expert on AI, because like I just started to totally geek out on it, and the same thing happens on a day-to-day basis with my workday, as you mentioned. When in the course of like an 8-hour day, I just like really throw myself into the work, to the point where like I almost lose my sense of self. Like it's almost like a form of meditation. From a yogic perspective. The flip side, of course, with the ADHD is if I get bored by a topic and it's not really entertaining or I'm not that excited about it, then it's really hard for me to focus and to continue with that, which is another reason why I strongly recommend to listeners who are neurodiverse that you pick something that you love, rather than doing something that you find boring, because then you can really lean into your superpower.
I love you highlighting what the superpower is, what the gifts come from having diversity within your intersectionality. And you mentioned intersectionality and the layers of identity that each of us are kind of like claiming. From your personal perspective, like where do you identify with all of that conversation?
I get very inspired by the LGBTQ community because it's also invisible in our case for neurodiversity, and they kind of have blazed a path forward for us and showed us how to do it when you have something that makes you an other, and people can't really immediately see it on your face, and so like I feel like working with other people who are labeled as disabled or other marginalized communities, we can intersect together and grow together, and it can and united, we have a lot more of a chance to succeed. And that is what how I feel about neurodiversity too. In the case of neurodiversity, it has its strengths and it has its weaknesses. I feel like for work in particular, it's like mostly positive, like because I could just really throw myself into my work, and that's very exciting for me. In the personal life, it has its challenges, which is why a lot of people who are neurodiverse, we have therapists. But like the what's great about the workplace is that it's rules based, and so like particularly for people on the autistic spectrum, like in my case, once you learn those rules, and we're very good with learning the rules and like it's sticking to them. We like those kinds of rules. Like it becomes really easy to understand the algorithm to work and being successful at it. So like, I feel like the answer is nuanced and complex, and it depends on what that word means to you.
What you said was leaning into neurodiversity in the workplace is mostly positive. And I think that statement alone needs to be loud everywhere, because differences often have a negative connotation to them at times. And that was a beautiful, powerful statement. It is mostly positive in the workplace. That would give so much hope to parents and a lot, people navigating this that are maybe not as far along as you are.
In this world, if you try to make yourself like everybody else, then you're just going to be drowned out by everybody else. If you try to find a way that you're different, that you're special, then that's how you stand out from the crowd. That's how you achieve success, by being extraordinary.
You seem very aware of your gifts and what you can leverage in your career to advance it, and what your expertise are and where your power lies. Can we look back for a minute?
Sure.
How does that look from a little guy, a little Yan, to powerful Yan, like creating all these awesome tools and user experiences?
For a long time, I really wanted to be like everybody else. I felt like the problem was that I didn't fit in, and like I was also really privileged in many ways, and in ways that are unavailable to people these days. Being a white male from an affluent family, was able to have resources like being able to go to a special program called BOCES Special Education, where if you had a high IQ and you performed well in school, you were placed in a special program for neurodiverse kids, a small classroom. I think like at the most there was just like 10 people, and we were given personalized teaching. And in other cases, like we took the classes with the rest of the kids. And I took this program between the age of 10 and 18. And I credit this program to a large part of my success, because one of the things that they taught me in this program was the need to work on myself and to keep improving on the areas that are weaknesses in order for me to integrate well into society. And so that path of like continual self-improvement is what led me into UX in the first place. I'm in an area of UX called user research. I do qualitative and quantitative user research, which means that I look at the analytics, I look at the numbers on the quantitative side, but I also have to deal with people on the qualitative side. So the analytical side, of course, being on the autistic spectrum, like putting together numbers and patterns, that's really good. And I was good at that even as a kid. That was something that I realized early on I'm going to be good at. Like my career should be about that. And so did my parents. They were very supportive and they encouraged me to lean into tech. But the qualitative side was always something that I felt like from an early age that I like getting people, understanding people, like that's something that I need to work on, being on the autistic spectrum. And so that's why I'm really into the qualitative piece of the user research, because I have to relate to my users. I have to understand what they're going through. I have to understand what we call the mental model, or how they approach things. And so that, like, I feel like being a user researcher is a continuation of my journey. That's just my solution. I'm not saying that all neurodiverse people should become user researchers, but just try to find what you're passionate about and what makes you succeed. And rather than focusing on the negatives, lean into the positives. Regardless of whether you're a kid that's been diagnosed or whether you're an adult, you are exceptional, and make that work for you.
I heard you just say that from a little guy, it was important for you to understand not only yourself, but also the people around you, which were going to look different. And in becoming an expert in doing that, that is translated into a user experience and your AI work that is building greater understanding of an experience, a human experience with technology. That is so cool. And lean into what is exceptional to fit in. That is what you had to do to find a place in our society, which is so powerful and actually scary as a human being to go, okay, I'm going to lean into that thing, maybe while you're getting used to it until you're brave and bold enough. And then you do it and you're like, oh, look at what you're doing.
It's a process. It's not like you're all of a sudden you're there. I had, like I said, like I'm very privileged. And so I had years and years and years to work on this. I've met others who are neurodiverse in my field. There are many of us, and they also it took them many years to figure this out. Like it's not unusual to take like an entire decade to sometimes figure this out or more. To see, like life is a journey, and it's not like you just snap your fingers and you have a solution. You have to think about it. You have to lead into it. There's other things that like apply to neurotypical people that apply to us, like the concepts behind personal branding and personal marketing. Like all these sorts of ideas apply to us too, and we just have to figure out how to make them work for us.
I want to say the stat that you said before we started, which was 50% of employees that are in tech are neurodiverse in some spectrum, which I think is a very important number for the companies that follow this podcast to understand that the non-apparent diversities that are going on within their organizations are much broader, bigger, larger, prevalent than what we're given credit for.
And this is actually like, I bring this number up to be encouraging to people who are neurodiverse. For a long time, I lived in fear, honestly, that I was afraid that if I went in public with being neurodiverse, that I would lose my career, because so much of my career is based off of knowledge and what I know and how I could share and relate to others. And I was worried that like the moment that people think that I'm neurodiverse and that they're going to think that I'm an other, that I'm not going to be able to share this information, they're going to rely on like what the internet says about my diagnoses rather and just label me accordingly, intentionally or otherwise, well-intentioned or otherwise. And that would be the end of my career. And so that's how I approached 15 years. But then when I went public with it, first of all, I met a whole bunch of other people who are neurodiverse. And they told me that, like, number one, it was very good for me to go public for them. But also, I learned that this community is of neurodiverse folks. We all benefit from supporting each other. And so I recommend not that everyone goes public if you're not comfortable with it, but at least don't live in fear, because this is what makes you special.
You're listening to Pushing Forward with Alycia, and we will be right back. If you're an employer looking to motivate and inspire your team through the power of diversity and inclusion, and learn more about disability inclusion in the workplace and how to include disability into your DEI efforts, please check out my keynote speech offerings on AlyciaAnderson.com. That's ALYCIA Anderson with an O.com. Click on speaking. Welcome back to Pushing Forward with Alycia. I'm Alycia. We have Yan Vishnepolsky. His passion lies in artificial intelligence, and he was also diagnosed as neurodiverse at an early age. Yan, may we also put some responsibility on these companies to start creating environments where it feels safe, like psychologically.
Yes.
They're like, oh, hey, this is me. Yeah, I'm in a wheelchair, but I still can do 100%. This. And so the conversations are more comfortable, and we don't feel like we need to hide ourselves because of stigma, untruths, and false assumptions, and all of those things that whatever your path is of being different that we live under especially when we're trying to grow our careers. So talk about being exhausted after 8 hours.
Yeah.
Like.
Oh, so you brought up a good point. So like everything in this world, second law of thermodynamics, you can't create energy from nothing. So like the hyper focus side comes out in positive ways at work, but on the personal side, like after a hard day's worth of work, it definitely like a full 8 hour day where I'm like completely hyper focused for 8 hours. Like I'm exhausted afterwards. Like I'm like completely dead. And for 2 hours or more, like I just cannot function. I cannot do things. Stuff like that, like is like the downside. So like people in the course of our work, like neurotypical people will see it as mostly as a positive. But when in we're entire human beings and not just machines, and so like it comes out on the other side when it comes to personal lives and so forth. And so just trying to maintain that work-life balance is my suggestion to companies that care about this topic.
And would that also be another, like, let's put it back on the companies, having flexible work schedules, creating
Yes.
where people start to raise their hand and say, this is the adaptation I need. This is the tool that I need. This is what will help me not have to mask so hard or overcompensate because you're not creating a place that I can raise my hand or say, I just need a little bit of a break here because my brain is working hard right now.
Yes. All of that is amazing and 100% agree with everything that you just said. That was very well said. I would also add that it's not just a tool, like it's also like a practice. Remote work is something that has come up again and again and again among about all my friends from neurodiverse. Maybe not everyone who's neurodiverse feels this way, but at least everyone that I've talked to who's neurodiverse feels that remote work has been amazing for them. Like it's just been a really positive change in their life. In terms of all of the things that you mentioned. And so I would really advocate for remote work too, in addition to all those things.
I found fascinating that you use AI, not only like in your work development and expertise, but you also use it as kind of a tool to adapt to the world in the workplace. Like if you're having to go into a meeting and you are needing to have a task and you can kind of like engage with AI and understand like more of a neurotypical response.
One of the things about being neurodiverse is that we tend to geek out about a topic and we go all in on it. And so my area that I went all in on was AI. I've always been like a sci-fi geek, and so when AI came around, I was like, "Ooh, like ChatGPT is bringing sci-fi to life," and so I really started to explore for that reason. But then I realized like it is actually insanely helpful for me as a neurodiverse person because ChatGPT has been basically programmed on an intersection of everybody. It's a statistical approach that like outputs words based off of like what the average response would be. And so what is the average response? It's nothing but being a neurotypical response. And like if I want to anticipate what a neurotypical person would say or how they would react or how should I approach a topic with a neurotypical person that I'm trying to convince on something, like that's very common in my line of work, is trying to sell people on a topic. It helps me anticipate what someone else might say, and it's been scarily accurate and good at that. As an accessibility tool, I feel like AI is really great stuff.
Speaking of AI, I want to hear about your podcast. Your podcast is called Human Centered AI. It's very good. I've listened to several episodes.
Thank you.
What is your why for doing this?
So right now, AI is a hot topic. It's viral. It's everywhere. People are talking about it. But it's also really new. And so that means that there's a lot of things that can be learned. My parents are a huge inspiration to me and why I went into tech. My mom and my dad, they were part of a 100-person team on IBM that wrote TCP/IP, which is basically the connective structure of the internet. And that set a really high bar for me. Because I was like, oh, okay, my parents did that. Like, how do I even come close to achieving something like that? And then AI came out, and I was like, okay, so now everyone's on equal footing. if I'm ever going to try to match my parents' achievement, then this is my moment. And so I really leaned into AI, and I tried to discover something new, or like at least come up with some new thoughts. And that's the wonderful thing about new technologies and moments like this, because I'm sure that this is history repeats, and this moment will come again. Like, so there will be something else, some new technology, some other advancement in the future. And when that moment comes, if you just grab it and try to get ahead of it, you have an opportunity to be a leader. And so that's why I started this podcast, to talk to other people who feel the same way that I do, and see how they're exploring AI and how they're using it for their work. And to my great surprise, it turned out to be a fairly popular podcast, at least in the UX community. And so I'm continuing with it. And I feel like part of that is I have a wonderful team that works with me. It's not just me. And between all of us, the podcast makes it happen. And I've met many cool people as a result of this podcast. And I feel like doing this was the right decision.
I love it. I'm getting the same thing for my podcast. My favorite thing is the cool people that I'm meeting, like you today.
Yes.
I'm looking at the title of your podcast, and I'm seeing what I love about it personally is, because I'm like really human-centered, is the human-centered part. Why human-centered plus AI? Like,
yes. So I feel like the AI, the word itself, like in the word itself, it's AI means artificial intelligence. It's artificial, and so like, but nonetheless, we have to get it to work with people, right? Like, if we want to make it usable, like if it's so artificial, then how are ordinary people going to use it? And so, how do we do that? By making it more human centered. And then the area that I'm in my career anyway, besides like AI, this is what I've been doing for the last 15 years. Is it's called human-centered design, or user experience design. And so that's how the topic came about, was like, how do we take this AI and connect it with user experience concepts to make it more relatable to people and not so artificial? And so the tagline to my podcast is human intelligence, artificial support, because like another thing that I'm worried about, concerned about, is like AI automating people out of their jobs and people losing their livelihoods. And by keeping it ethical and human-centered, then we limit the negative effects on jobs.
And I think that is some of the most important advocacy work that you could do. When we wrap up this show, it's called Pushing Forward with Alycia. I always ask my guests if they can, and I kind of sneak attack and surprise you. Do you have a little gift that you could give away to our audience today?
Yeah. So I kind of brought this up earlier, but lean into what makes you exceptional, what makes you different. If you think that you have a particular strength, then use that, and don't worry about all the things that make you different in ways that like make you stand out from the other crowd, because those are actually the good things. Those are what makes you, and those will make you strong.
I'm into that 100%. Thank you for your time, Yan, and thank you to the Pushing Forward with Alycia community for joining us for this beautiful conversation today. We will see you next time. This has been Pushing Forward with Alycia, and that is literally how we roll on this podcast. If you're an employer looking to motivate and inspire your team through the power of diversity and inclusion, and learn more about disability inclusion in the workplace and how to include disability into your DEI efforts, please check out my keynote speech offerings on AlyciaAnderson.com. That's ALYCIA Anderson with an O.com. Click on speaking.